All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us. Nilo, go ahead.
No, no, you go ahead.
My name's Kristen Spencer. I'm a medical oncologist at NYU, and I'm here with my co-chair, Dr. Nilo Azad of the Next Generation Committee for the Cholangiocarcinoma Foundation. Nilo, did you want to say anything, or shall I keep?
No, it's just wonderful to see or at least see the names of all of you people in the black boxes, and I hope that this is going to be a great hour where we can learn from one of the masters in our field, or a few of the masters in our field, as it might be.
Yes, so this is part of a six-part webinar series designed to bring topics to trainees, that'd be fellows, medical students, anyone that wants to join and can benefit from the advice and mentorship from those that have gone before. And so this special webinar, we're really very excited to have two of the titans in the industry, Dr. Juan Valle and Dr. Milind Javle, who are going to have what we're now coming to fondly call a little fireside chat. Nilo and I will join in as well, just to go over their career as a clinical researcher and what that entailed, some of the pitfalls, some of the pits and the pearls, I actually like to say. So we'll go through that with them. As many of you that can turn on your camera, we know that you're not all perhaps in a place where you can do that, but we'd really love for this to be interactive. Please feel free to ask your questions. And other than that, I will just go ahead and give it on over to Juan. And Melinda's popping in and out due to another commitment, but if he's on right now, could introduce himself as well.
Hello there. It's great to be here. I'm Milind Javle. I'm a professor of GI oncology at MD Anderson Cancer Center. It's so good to be out here on this fireside chat with some of my favorite people. The people interviewing us, Kristen and Nilo, are powerhouses in their own right. So I'm really looking forward to learning from them. My only regret is we are not sitting around a fire with hot chocolate, but I'm looking forward to the next hour.
Thank you. And I also want
Juan?
to say hello to everybody. Thank you for joining this informal fireside chat. Thank you, Kristen and Nilo, for inviting us to speak. And it's going to be great to share this time with Milind and with all of you. Um, so I think what we did, we just had a few um, opening questions that we wanted to ruminate over, but we're very open to taking any questions from the audience. And I guess the first one is why Milind, did you pursue a career in oncology? What drew you to oncology in the first place?
So one, I'm back from the Stone Ages. So I did medical school in my late 80s. And I really had an attraction for taking care of the really sick people. I was very interested in moving to areas which had a great unmet need and where I saw the greatest difficulty in treating patients. So I did my residency in the 90s and in downstate in New York City in the 90s, where you have patients full of the wards were full of HIV patients, and I thought of actually doing that. And then it was my first rotation in oncology as an intern in Roswell Park, where I got really excited with the thought of oncology. I felt even at that time that this couldn't be real, that we have these therapies, we don't know if they work, but we're going to try them anyway. And I found a great unmet need. I found a population of patients who were so appreciative for even the little that we offered. So I had no doubt after that rotation that this is what I wanted to do. So Juan, I've looked up to you for all that you have achieved in BTC. And this is like a niche area. Like, did you grow up thinking you're going to be like a cholangiocarcinoma doctor?
Not at all. So my initial interest was in fact gastroenterology. But I think that was mainly because of the drama, variceal bleeding, endoscopies, emergency stuff. But then the penny eventually drops. You can't, well, I couldn't see myself doing that for the rest of my career and being up all night with GI emergencies. Um, and then somebody gave me a very good tip. They said, be aware that the decision you're making now means that you will be doing this for the rest of your life. So think what's going to be your bread and butter every day. And when I looked at gastroenterology at that time, there was in the unit that I was working, there's a lot of irritable bowel syndrome. And I figured I can't do this the rest of my life. So I liked the GI side. And then my rotation took me onto oncology, completely fell in love with oncology. And so focusing on GI oncology then seemed to be a natural step. Um, but to answer your question, Milind, no, cholangiocarcinoma wasn't an initial target. I was originally appointed to manage patients with colorectal cancer. That was the need in our institution. But it was just around the time when liver surgery for colorectal liver metastases was emerging. So that shows how old I am. But those patients also needed to be discussed at multidisciplinary team meetings. And as part of those MDTs, occasional patients with pancreas cancer or cholangiocarcinoma were discussed, and there were no standards of care in those days. And so I gradually ended up accumulating patients with HPV malignancies and neuroendocrine tumors that nobody else wanted to treat, and was able to build a big enough practice to be able to do the clinical trials that we then gradually developed. But it does lead to another question.
Sorry, Juan. I wanted to mention to the audience that very proud that Juan was nominated as the top 1 percentile of the cancer researchers in the University of Manchester. Actually, of all scientists in the University of Manchester. So, Juan, that's a wonderful journey, and we are very proud of you. I've been always curious, Juan. People like Nilo, for instance, who are such focused researchers in cholangio, but also do a variety of other malignancies. Nilo, do you have your input on how does it work? Like how can one? I mean, my journey started as prostate cancer. That's what I wanted to do, but here I am doing cholangio. But what do you think, Nilo? Between
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, like being able to follow in the footsteps of Juan is always a pathway to success. So, Juan started in colorectal cancer, and so did I. Again, I was an ovarian cancer researcher as a fellow. That's what I did, but I was a drug development person. And I think this is one of the things I tell my fellows all the time is that what matters is how you take care of patients and what science you're interested in. And then there's actually a fair amount of commonality. And so I was able to move the drug development work I was doing in ovarian cancer into colon cancer, but I was a phase 1 trialist. And years into my colon cancer career, I opened a trial that had a few cholangio patients on it that did well. And so I opened an extra cohort. I got funding and opened an extra cohort in cholangio. And that was my entrance into this world of cholangiocarcinoma. So almost 10 years ago. And this is such an inviting and collaborative international group of researchers. It has so many benefits when it's a small community where people know each other, they're committed in mission. And so within a couple of years, it felt like I went from not having done any cholangio to just finding this to be a great love and mission of my life. And so I think that's possible, and being able to bridge some of these science, I work in KRAS right now. KRAS is extraordinarily important in pancreas cancer, but guess what? MAP kinase is very, very important in cholangio as well. And it has not been difficult at all to be working across these different, pretty similar tumor types because of the science and because of the patients. So that's my perspective on it. I know, Kristen, you also work on more than one tumor type,
I do, and I think my story is probably similar to yours. Most of my work was actually in melanoma, so I was able to start, right when checkpoint inhibitors first came into clinical trials, and that's, where I fell in love with clinical research and particularly early phase research, and that happens to also be where a lot of the need is, and a lot of the work is being done in biliary tract cancers now. So I think that's complemented quite nicely. And so, I have interest in KRAS, but also in MTAP. And so PRMT5 inhibitors are now coming through in the phase 1 space a second time, really. But we're really seeing benefit, particularly for our biliary tract cancer patients who haven't had great options before, those that have that alteration. So it's been a really nice place to develop. And I totally agree with you. The community is just so inviting. So I think especially when you're in the early phase space, a lot of things translate. There's a lot of commonalities. And so it is possible, I think, to see a little bit of everything, but perhaps be enriched, at least, both in clinic or at least in your research focus in a particular tumor type.
Yeah, just to quickly follow on from that, I remember very vividly having to make a decision on when to start narrowing down my focus. And I think at one point in your career, you want to be what I call pluripotent. You want to be able to go in different directions, maybe move to a different institution. So you want to make sure that you've got a fairly good grounding. So I wanted to keep up with all of GI oncology, colorectal. My initial interest was in esophagogastric, less so in HPV and neuroendocrine tumors. Then gradually, I just my institution meant that I wasn't ever going to do esophagogastric because they were very separate teams. So I stepped away from doing OG, but then stepping away from colorectal and just focusing on HPV and NET was really such a super specialization that I then had to think, am I then going to be niched that I can never move from my institution? So I think sometimes it is important to just kind of think about kind of future steps as well. But at some point, you do need to make a commitment of narrowing down. And I think now that we've got, you know, molecular subgroups and targets that we can go on, is a little bit more of an agnostic approach again. It gets a little bit broader again.
Well, I totally agree with you. I think some of this is a consequence, not consequence, but a reflection of how your practice is as your institution, right? So how many partners you have and how sort of subdivided into tracks or tumor types you are. So I happen to be at an institution where we aren't up until now. I do think that I don't know how long that's going to be feasible as we get more and more advanced within each tumor type, and we're not using 5FU for everything across the board, right? I do think that we will have to pick a focus eventually. The way we've gotten around it for now is, as I've said, you can always focus on something as your research interest. And then the nice part about being in a place where you have partners that see a little bit of everything is that you have people that can help you enroll patients on your clinical trials and treat the patients and collect your samples and things of that nature. But that's sort of one way, again, how I've gotten around it. But I think it is getting harder.
Yeah. Well, I think I remember having a conversation with one of our fellows some time ago and saying, well, all the niches are taken. Oncology is so busy, and there are no niches left. And even at that time, just with a little bit of thinking, you think, well, the population is now getting older. We probably don't know enough about, assessing frailty, polypharmacy, comorbidities in an elderly population. Also in Manchester, we were living in a very cosmopolitan city, but the hospital was not a representation of our population. So there's so much that we need to learn about pharmacokinetics and drugs discovery in, different races and ethnicities. So there's always a niche. I think it is worth looking for a niche. And even though at times it looks like they're all taken, I think it is important that individuals just think, where could I go and be able to develop the field or even open a new field?
Right.
So can we quickly go on to the next slide? This is another question that I'm often asked, and I know Milinda's had to just jump onto another call. He will come back. But another question I get asked or have been asked is, how do you get to work with industry? And this really goes back to my pre-faculty days. I used to go around to ASCO. And you know that very often the people that you see at ASCO may be, for example, the marketing people. But I would spend all my time looking for the one part of the booth that was talking about their pipeline. And so I would look at the pipeline, see what's coming, see what's in development, just to kind of take some notes, get an idea of themes. And, these themes change frequently. For those of you who are old enough, you'll remember things like, high dose chemotherapy and stem cell rescue. And then there was matrix metalloproteinase inhibitors. And, every few years there are different trends. But being able to find out what is new, what is coming, and then, trying to make a contact with the right person in industry. Again, you need to be aware that there are very different groups within industry, some very much involved with marketing, and really the people that we need to be talking to are the clinical development people. And so trying to find out who is the right person and who is the decision maker to be able to give you some answers on your questions. And I remember putting in multiple proposals to industry for the first study in biliary tract cancer that we would get in the UK. And most, 10 out of 11 or so, just said this is not in our strategic development plan. But you keep plugging, you keep pushing away, keep looking at other options. I don't know, Nilo, how you started off working with industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things about working with industry I feel over these years that I've learned. And the most important thing is that, like everything, it's really about building relationships. And so those relationships take time to build. So, and a lot of like what we talk about networking, it's people getting to know you, getting to know the kind of work that you do, that you know what you're talking about, that you do high quality work. And that can take usually years to build. So I think the industry relationships that I've had the most, that have found the most useful, are people that I've worked with on their industry sponsored studies, shown that I'm an engaged, interested partner, and then continue to kind of talk to them about my work, and then been able to kind of leverage that. The other thing is that companies are different. Every company is different, and the decision makers, to what Juan was just saying, at each company is different. And they have a different, they have a different structure. And so you have to understand and be thinking about the nuances of each company. Small biotech is different, more nimble, but with less money, as compared to big companies that have big pharma, have a million people, and it's harder to know who the decision makers are. And so I think that is another thing that you have to kind of tailor that conversation and the people that are in the room to what the company is as well.
Kristen, how did you start working with industry?
Yeah, well, first we'll echo totally what you guys have said. Is number one is it takes time.
Mm.
I'm still not there. I think a lot of the ways in terms of being a quote go-to person for industry, it really does take time to build those relationships, and you can't expect them to happen overnight. And I agree that I think one of the things that, at least for me, happened early in my career is I spent a lot of time, and I don't want this to come across as wasted time. None of the time is wasted, but I spent a lot of time with the wrong people, marketing, places where I didn't quite understand the structure. And I think that's really helpful. But I will also say, I think one thing that's really helpful is to leverage the cooperative group and NCI system. So that's how I actually had my first investigator initiated trial in partnership with EMD Serono, was through a CTEP project team. And I think likewise, participating in ICRN, where there's a lot of built-in mentorship, is wonderful. And sort of pairing yourself with folks like, Milind, Juan, Peter O'Dwyer. I must have popped up at every meeting. Hi, it's Megan. Hey, how are you? Until it was finally like, gosh, who is this girl? Like, we need to give her something to do because she's driving me bonkers. And that was just persistence in, building those relationships as well with mentors who can help you, guide you and give you projects that, to work on, because that's the hardest part in the beginning, is coming up with something, that's a good idea, and the connections to make it happen.
Yeah, just to quickly before we move away from industry, what you don't know as early career investigators, but you should know, is that when you're a PI on a clinical trial for industry, they are tracking your metrics. And so your center, you as a PI, they will not just have data on how many patients you've screened, how many you've recruited, but the importance of data, how quickly you've submitted the data back, completeness of data, accuracy of data. So, gaining that track record with industry is so important, but be mindful. It's not just about recruitment. It's making sure that right through to the quality of the data, the number of queries, how they work with your site, all of that is tracked in the background by industry. So be aware of that.
And Juan, I also add your social media and your presentation presence. That was something I also was not aware of, is that, you know, I'm still terrible at this, is being active on social media, but they do look at that, and they do watch you when you present, and you know how you project and how you speak and how you present yourself, and the data on whatever topic you're presenting on. That will also often lead to more invitations.
Yeah. And on the next slide, I think you started covering this already, Kristen, with getting an investigator study up and running through the cooperative groups. I think it also goes on to the next slide. But, you know, I've been asked, how do you get an IST up and running? And of course, we have many ideas. And one of my mentors, I think, got frustrated with me once and said, well, ideas are two a penny. Making them happen is the important thing. And so I think what I then decided to develop, and I'm sure many centers have got this, and you may have one as well, is called a study and discussion synopsis. So very similar to what you see at the beginning of a protocol. You have that executive summary of what a study looks like. But if you have your own checklist of what is the background, what's the hypothesis, what are your aims, what are your objectives, what are your numbers, some stats underpinning those numbers. But then the other thing that's very important is the feasibility. Can you do this? Can you do this at just your one center? Are you going to do this across multiple centers? Who is the sponsor? And so just being able to put all of those thoughts into a 2-3 page document where it just shows that you've thought about all these things systematically. I found that was a better approach than sending open-ended letter of I have an idea. So something that's very specific also comes across as very professional. I don't know, Kristen, Nilo, whether you've got any thoughts on how you did that.
I'm a big fan of modeling after other success. And so my first LOI that I did, I took an LOI from another investigator, as you know, who's my mentor, and that was successful. And I looked at it, and I really modeled. And after that, and what you'll find is that LOIs across companies and the NCI have a very similar structure. You know, one page of rationale, one page of your study design. And so making sure that you're giving, this is basically the equivalent of doing a chalk talk. You're trying to put your most compelling evidence in there. I find things that are really worth highlighting when you're trying to do an IST and an LOI is, what are the metrics for this to help get a drug approved or get it a new indication? That's what companies want. And so, so if you're really putting an IST, think about it and keep that business sense in as well as the science. That took me some time to realize. I used to get very excited by the science and like, oh, it's so nifty that, we're going to change the tumor microenvironment in this way. And that's all well and good. They want to do those things, but they want to know how they're going to get their drug into more patients in a way that has, a business benefit. And so I think I'd really try to frame my rationale around that and my study design around that too.
I agree with all of this. The only thing I will add is I think one of the things I've really had to learn is that not everything needs to be Tolstoy. And I think that's really important. I would spend a lot of time on putting together just an outline. And, a lot of what you're proposing is going to change 15 times. You just need to get something out there in front of them to start a conversation. So just the basics of, simple background, population, some stats to get started, a straw man design. Don't go crazy developing this like novel on the background, and that will come later. That took me a while to learn as well.
Yeah, it's very helpful. I'm glad Milind's back, because I think our next question is around, how do I decide to get a trial running through a cooperative group? Probably not the best person to answer this one, because I think the setup is quite different in the US. So maybe Milind, how do you get something through a cooperative group?
Yeah. Yes, Juan. So I've been working with the cooperative groups and the task force for some time, and it is both an exciting as well as can appear discouraging to younger people. I'll give you some hints about how to go about it. First of all, it is good to work with, if you're a junior investigator, find a mentor in your neighborhood who has some experience working with cooperative groups. Every cooperative group, like if you want a GI, it has, for instance, a hepatobiliary chair. Through your mentor or directly, you can email or contact the hepatobiliary chair about a concept that you're interested in. Remember, the cooperative groups were designed to conduct trials that pharma were not going to conduct. For instance, adjuvant therapy, prevention studies, or large questions like that, which need a large amount of population. So come up with the idea. I think it starts just like Kristen and Nilo said, a discussion with your mentor, discussion with the cooperative group chair. It's very important to get into the process, propose things, because you at least learn about the process. Not only do you learn about the process, you meet the leaders in the field, and you meet a peer group that will be helpful for you in the future. Then eventually you end up proposing this concept. It's always helpful to get preliminary data. So for instance, Dr. Shroff had proposed a trial for gemcitabine and Abraxane. She already conducted a phase 2 trial that was looking promising. So she approached us saying that she wants to do a phase 3 trial. Of course, so there was preliminary data, there was there was an area of great unmet need, and we didn't have a first-line trial at BTC at that time. So all the ducks sort of lined up. At that time, she approached the pharma company, which makes nab-paclitaxel. They too were on board because they also need to agree that it is within their portfolio. So all of these steps, I think, can lead to a successful proposal. I want to put a little damper that 1 out of 8 or 1 out of 10 proposals actually makes it. But I can tell you all 10 of those who apply learn about the process, meet the leaders in the field, and if not this avenue, it opens up many different avenues. So I'll stop there, but I also want to get experience any of you have working with the cooperative groups and to see how we can facilitate that and make it better.
I'll just echo.
Nilo, have you proposed?
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to echo what you said, Milind, that I think, you know, I have been tiny bit successful in the cooperative group system in getting a trial through, but I think the rewards otherwise have been, I mean, astronomical. They've been career making in terms of the connections and the folks that you meet, and they're fun. It's a lot of fun. Just, you know, tossing around ideas and developing concepts and taking them from bench to bedside together, I think is wonderful. I will also echo what Milind says, and a little bit of what Nilo was talking about with writing an LOI, that part of how you make a trial successful, you can have a great idea, you can have perfect statistics, the right population, but you need to execute it. And some of that, you have to have a good understanding of your population and what you're trying to do. And there are things that fit in the cooperative group system and things that don't. And there's a lot of benefits and there are drawbacks. So, you know, it depends on where the funding's coming from, the rarity of your population. I think it's really important to understand, you know, what the benefits and drawbacks of the cooperative group system are, so you can think really critically about what trials to place there versus what not to even go that route.
Nilo, I don't know if you want to
add
anything.
Describe what you're Juan, sorry, I just want to describe, you know, successes are rare, but it's a mixed story. Like, you know, the FGFR2 fusion was my colleague, Dr. Merrick here, she was doing a trial with a drug and saying that you might have some cholangiocarcinoma patients have this FGFR2 fusion. Let's look for them. This was just around the time when NGS was coming around. We referred some patients to a trial. We found a few patients responded. We wrote an LOI to, at that time, Novartis, and they said, yes, this looks interesting. We'll fund it. We enrolled a couple of patients. Then the company said, we will take over the trial. And then eventually it became a phase 2 and the drug got FDA approved. That happens very, very rarely. However, even for myself, who has been doing it for so long, but even along that journey, there are several steps that you learn from. One step is to find some preliminary data, find some rationale, find something that makes you the qualified individual to do that particular trial. Talk to the MSL and see, are they interested? And then, like Kristen said, propose the LOI and refine it. So I think this can only happen if you try and you execute your leverage among your peers and really all of us. I can tell you, Juan, Kristen, Nilo, and I, we are very happy to assist you in any way as well, remotely.
Yeah, and I think the systems are very different. And certainly in the UK, we have a different system, but there are some similarities in that, taking something through a cooperative group or a task force means that your study undergoes peer review. And so there's a degree of hopefully refinement and improvement of the study through that peer review process. But also, I think most importantly, it's about generating buy-in. There's no point in having a good study that no one recruits to, because that is so disappointing. So it is important that by working through that mechanism, there's buy-in of enough of the investigators that's going to make the trial feasible. And the second thing, just to quickly add, is that getting knocked back at that stage doesn't necessarily mean that it's not the right thing. And just to give you a very specific example, when I was pitching for ABC01 many years ago to Cancer Research UK, Cancer Research UK had 2 or 3 meetings a year where they were discussing trial proposals. This covered all of GI cancer. I don't think they'd received a proposal in cholangiocarcinoma. And then on the same meeting, we didn't know each other, but John Bridgewater and I proposed a study on biliary tract cancer independently. And Cancer Research UK, in their wisdom, came back to us and said, no, we're not going to fund either of these studies. You guys need to talk. And so from that initial no, the collaboration was set up with John Bridgewater. We're great friends and colleagues, and we had the ABC studies came from that, the Bill Cup study, and a photodynamic therapy study came from that. So no is not always bad.
So, Juan, I think this is a fabulous journey, which has really changed the trajectory of this disease, in terms of the first GEMSIS trial. I have a question for really all of you, starting with you, Nilo, and then you, Kristen. I think clinical trials are important. It's exciting to run them. Remember, I want to also mention to the junior faculty that a trial will take 3 or 4 years or longer. And then just the nature of trials in oncology, success is low. But at the same time, you can have your research portfolio flowing, and that requires a good research team. So, Nilo, you're sort of more seasoned there at Hopkins, and Kristen, you are as well. You're junior to us, but you have just moved into a new high-power facility. So I'd like to learn from both of you, how did you build your research team, and how do you diversify your research outside of clinical trials? Nilo?
Yeah, so when I was in fellowship, I decided not to go into the laboratory, and I aligned very tightly with a translational researcher. And because of that, I was able to do very heavily correlative, translationally heavy trials as a fellow. Then I moved to Johns Hopkins. That was at the NCI, where everything's paid for by the government. Makes it easy. Then I moved to Hopkins, and I thought the same thing was going to happen. And what I realized after about a year was that the questions that I had, the scientific questions I had, the kind of work I needed to do to be able to write good LOIs, I didn't find an investigator that was perfectly aligned. Everyone had their own questions and they were running their own lab. So at a year, I'm not sure I'm recommending this, but a year into my facultyhood with no lab experience, I decided to open a lab. And so I used my startup money to hire a laboratory staff. And I didn't know what in the world I was doing. I wasted money for a good year. Then I found good mentorship. I applied for grants, and I ended up getting a series of grants that were large grants that were lab based. And it still amazes me that somebody trusted me with that. But it was because I had good mentorship, laboratory based mentorship. I had good clinical mentorship, and I put a team together, like what Melinda's talking about. And then I coordinated the team, and that allowed me to compete successfully. So then I've, fast forward to now, for 10 years, I had an active lab that was open. I was, able to successfully get grants, but then I also was I was training people. And then I ended up training a couple of amazing junior investigators that are now, mid-level, soon to be senior investigators who are truly translational and lab-based. And so I was then able to kind of contract what I was doing and be more focused and be the clinical arm of our larger team with, Mark Yarshwin, who's a, very strong laboratory-based researcher now being my partner. So one of the things I think is important is that your career is going to go through evolution, and there may be challenges that you take on outside of your comfort zone that don't mean that you have to sign up to be that kind of researcher forever, but will allow you to grow into the kind of person and have the kind of career that you want. And taking those kinds of risks, I think, is the whole reason we do this. Our risks are so small compared to the risks that our patients take when they come on to trials with us and work with us. Us taking some risks to be more impactful by building these kinds of teams, I think can really be satisfying as well. So.
Wonderful. So, Kristen, you have moved to a new center, I think just a few months ago. How are you planning to go about it over there to build your research team?
Oh, Milind, you flatter me. It's already 3.5 years ago. I moved to NYU.
Oh, my goodness.
But you look just as young as you did then,
Oh,
Kristen.
well,
It's
thank you.
yes.
Thank you. Foundations, good foundation. No,
Yeah.
I really quickly, I think as academic researchers, our research team can be defined in a number of different ways. I have my personal research interests, and what I will say about that is I had to really build my personal research career with external collaborators. So, Milind, you were instrumental in connecting me in the beginning of my career and remain one of my fondest mentors. And as I mentioned, Peter O'Dwyer in the past was really helpful for that. And what I would tell people is if you don't have the folks with the model that you need or the lab that you need or the interest of yours at your institution, look outside and you can build a wonderful network on the outside and be very productive. What Melinda's referring to is I took over now 3.5 years ago as director of the phase 1 program at NYU. And when I came on board, that program was really a one-man show, putting on 40 to 50 patients per year. And we've been able to grow that team to, over 100 accruals a year. And it's now 14, 15 faculty and complementary staff. And I think what I've learned building a clinical research team is that at the heart of all positions are interests. And so people come to you with positions. No, we don't want to open this trial. No, we don't want to accrue this patient. No, we don't want XYZ. And underlying that is an interest that you have to get to the bottom of, and you need to understand the why. And so I spent a lot of time listening, and even to this day, a lot of time listening, very little time talking. And so that's been at least helpful for me to understand where are all the different parts coming from, right? You need the data people, you need the nurses and the coordinators, you need the faculty, you need the patients, and you somehow need to get them all not just in the same rowboat, but rowing in the same direction. And the only way to do that is by listening and understanding. And I think at the end of the day, for everyone, it really often, most of the time, comes down to the patient. And so I will say, don't forget as well on a research team, the people that aren't directly making contact with those patients. So, for me, that's the data people frequently, my data coordinators, but it may be the person you collaborate who spends time in the lab and they're not in the clinic. They came to it because of the patient. And so I try to share patient stories and successes and how we're all accomplishing so much as a team to keep people motivated and aligned with the mission. So that's what I've, taken away from building a team.
The only thing I would add in addition to your comments, which are, stellar comments, was one of the things I had to learn somewhere along the line is that when you're running a research team, you're running a small business. You need to employ staff to be able to do the data. You need to employ research nurses, you need to employ fellows. and suddenly you realize this is a business that needs to have enough income to pay your salaries. You need to have enough in reserve to make sure that you've got at least ideally a year or so. And so then you need to think about balancing what the income is for your research program. And often that is going to be a balance, a blend between some industry funding from industry-sponsored studies. You want to do your own academic studies. You need to get some grant money. And so having some thoughts early on about how you're going to make this sustainable is important. And the second point, just to quickly add, that I learned along the way is to make sure that the right people are doing the right job. And just to highlight this, when I first joined and we had a small research team, it was the research nurses who were submitting the IRB forms, and they were spending a lot of time, doing these IRB submissions, which in fact could be done by an experienced, a trial coordinator. So we made sure that we aligned the roles specific to the tasks, which also means that you're efficient financially to be able to run your team.
I think these are really useful insights from the group. I think Nilo's journey is fabulous in the sense that she was so successful in getting grants, finding a laboratory mentor, being at Hopkins. Not everybody has that trajectory, and I think what Juan and Kristen also pointed out, that it's important to build a team and respect that team. So you have these postdocs. Some of the people working with me are practicing physicians in other countries who are working in your lab or collaborating with you. We have to treat them with respect, find questions that they can answer, make sure that they are credited in publications and presentations and travel grants and so on. But I think I think Juan said it very succinctly, you have to learn how to run your business. So after all these years, for instance, I have a team of research fellows. Some of them, I don't have a lab, but I work with a laboratory colleague, Larry Kwong, who runs a lab. And then I fund some people to work there. And you will find people like that who are willing to work with you. And it's a win-win relationship between clinical and translational researchers. You can find your mentors. A mentorship committee we have in Anderson. We are not restricted to Anderson. Actually, I was talking to somebody the other day. I was suggesting they get one as an online mentor. So these mentors don't need to be in-house. And you will find people who are willing to assist you in your career. You just have to be open, willing, and respectful.
Thank you. Thank you, Milind.
And I just want to mention one other thing is that sometimes you have to try on a few different pairs of shoes. And so, the first mentor the mentor I came to Hopkins thinking I was going to work with was not that person. And then the second mentor that I work with was very well-meaning, but actually was just not interested in what I was interested in. So it became very, there was a lot of generosity on that person's part, but it just wasn't fitting. So it was like, for me, it took 2.5 years and 3 mentors to try to find the right one. And of course, the other 2 people remained in my life, but I just mean in terms of like who's really going to fit your goals. So a lot of being in oncology and frankly in academics is just optimism, to keep trying, that even if this, if this LOI doesn't work, if this relationship isn't exactly perfect, that you're going to keep trying until you find that right fit and the right science and the right people. So.
Thank you. Yeah. Just on our next question really pivots back to working with industry, and sometimes we get invitations to attend an advisory board. Milind, you've done so many of these advisory boards, and I think it's a good bridge between industry and investigators. So what would your advice be to junior faculty on whether they should accept an invitation to an advisory board?
Yes. Accept it.
The first thing I would say is be careful. You have a lot of these advisory boards, maybe just marketing. Make sure you're going to get something out of it. The advantage of the advisory board is that you get to liaison. You're meeting all the KOLs in the field. You build connections with the pharma. so that you can propose their LOI, learn about what their interests are. For most part, the pluses outweigh the minuses, but go into it carefully. It should be an area that you're interested in. It should be, for instance, a drug or a device that you feel has a future, that you can contribute to it in a meaningful way. I would stay away from advisory boards, which are called advisory boards, but are nothing but like marketing exercises. In that instance, we have only so much time. So leverage whatever time you have more productively. I don't know, Kristen or Nilo?
I don't think I get invited to those, to the ones that you're talking about. I think that's right. I also think early in my career, I didn't want to be conflicted, and so I often didn't take money. One of the things about advisory boards is it's often a nice way to make a little extra pocket change. And so just think about that in the context of your particular institution. Hopkins is a very challenging institution to have conflicts at. And so if I had an interest in working with the drug, then I would not take the money and I would go and I would do it for the networking component. Now that now that I'm a little further along and I go to these meetings and everyone puts up like a slide with 7,000 different conflicts, I realize that but it's just something to think about depending on your particular institution.
Yeah, I agree. It's an important, I think, networking opportunity, but also is another place that speaks to what I was mentioning before about how industry is watching how you're presenting yourself. And this is one of those areas where they're doing that. So if you go and you offer meaningful contributions at an advisory board, you're more than likely going to not only just be invited to others, but the company will keep you in mind when they're thinking of additional opportunities for trials, for national PI of trial positions. It does help. I would also say I've now sort of taken to, if you're unclear what the advisory board is trying to do, the goal, you can ask. So I'll ask them, what is the topic going to be, who's going to be there. I think you can always ask questions and turn it down if it's not in line with your particular goals. But otherwise, I think they are great opportunities. I also learn a lot. You think, you're kind of we're in our silos. We don't think that we are, but it takes things like this where you hear, oh, wow, I didn't realize people had so much trouble getting an EGD before starting a TZO-BEV and HCC. And, you realize that you're maybe in a, little spoiled in one area and others are doing something completely differently. And I find that really, really a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, and I think I think we do need to emphasize one point that Nilo brought up is around be aware of what your institutional position is on this, because I think it is important that you align with that. That can also change. When I first started, our institutional position was not to work with industry at all. But then you're right, Kristen. After a while, you realize you learn a lot from the advisory boards. You learn about unpublished information, so things that are coming but not yet publicly available, and that's very useful to know. And I think it also really does allow you a chance to be able to share a drug, being able to provide a much better understanding of the disease group than is probably in that room. So I think I would agree with the previous comments. Definitely yes, but be aware of your institutional restrictions. Be aware about the need to then declare this with your interests going forward. Just on the next question that we had, and I think Milind touched on this briefly. He doesn't run a lab. I don't run a lab, or I didn't run a lab either. And so one of the questions was, when you don't run a lab, how do you build those interactions? I think, Nilo, in your case, you jumped in and opened a lab. Just to quickly tell you from my end, I think the important thing was trying to find somebody who has a shared interest in what you're trying to do. And that's not always easy. Sometimes labs are committed, for example, to do research in lung cancer or melanoma or something like that. And trying to get an inroad with a GI cancer, especially a rare cancer, can be a little bit challenging. The one thing, and I value your thoughts on this, the one thing that sometimes is a little bit of a tension where the clinicians are seen as just providers of samples. And the lab are doing the clever stuff, and we're just providing the samples. And sometimes that tension can come out, particularly when it leads to the time of publication, for example, and authorship and these things like that. It is definitely a relationship. And one of the things I found that really helped was inviting the lab people to come to the clinic, see some patients with me, sit in on some of those difficult conversations, because that then just brought it to life. This is not just cells you're dealing with or preclinical models or mice, but they can actually see that the patients that we've been dealing with. I don't know, Nilo, Kristen, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I will say I actually, that was a personal struggle of mine when at a couple of points in my career where I was involved with very well-regarded laboratory folks that, that they just the mutual understanding took some time and to develop, and so I think that when you're moving forward, I didn't do what you said, Juan, to invite them to the clinic. I think that might have been lovely. I think that's a great idea. But I do think that if your gut is telling you that there is a dynamic there that you need to kind of sort through, what I would say is don't like sit on it and wait until it's time to write the paper up, to really kind of flesh out that equality. It doesn't come up all the time, but the more interesting the work is, the more exciting everyone is in. The lab people are excited, and the clinical people. And so, it has come up a couple of times, even with people who got along very, very well. But it's just the enthusiasm kind of moves that, space.
Yeah, and I would just say I think one of the keys to interacting with basic science labs is, you'll hear people say learning their language. I think that's really important to understand some of the basic concepts and terminology. Go to the lab meetings if you can to hear about the experiments early on. And then I would also say I think sometimes it's easy to get overwhelmed in the fact that maybe you're not as familiar, you're in their territory now and you're not as familiar, but you bring something to them as well. And to Juan's point, even if they can't make it to your clinic, you still bring the patient aspect of it. And I remember being in a lab meeting, we were talking about a project that we were trying to bring to a clinical trial, and they wanted like 6 biopsies. And I was like, this is not, I know what you want, but that's not, we're lucky if we get 2. So let's rethink this. And it was sort of like, oh, really? Patients will only do 2? And I'm like, yeah, they don't even want to do that. So, I think you have something to bring to the table as well. And those conversations are really important. So I think I spent a lot of time going to lab meetings with Darren Carpizo, who hired me. So if you can get into the lab meetings, that's a good place to learn.
Yeah, another very useful example is when it's very easy to say, oh, we'll get a sample on disease progression. I think sometimes there's a lack of understanding of you have to have a difficult conversation with a patient, tell them the cancer's progressed, tell them the treatment has to stop, and now can we have a biopsy? I think it's sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect with just get a progression biopsy and the reality of doing this in the clinic. So I think the collaboration is key. I know we only have 3 minutes left. I want to just tap into Milind on the next question. Milind, you have an amazing track record of having developed and launched many careers. You've been a great mentor to many of people in the field. Just what are your key takeaways of how to be a good mentor, how to help develop careers?
Well, I think, Juan, first of all, there's some growth that you have to do yourself as a mentor. When you're in an academic career, there are not too many glories. Being on the podium presenting a phase 3 trial is a glory. So you have to get beyond that point to a stage where you actually enjoy seeing your junior present a path-breaking study or impact, care. And I can be honest with you, it's a journey. You have to traverse it and have the strong shoulders to do that. But ultimately, at my stage in my career, if there's a junior of mine presenting a study that changes the path of cancer, and you get credited somehow in the footnote, I think for me it's very satisfactory, because ultimately it is about the journey for the patient, and you have to remind yourself of that, especially when you are in your middle career. You have to think of yourself as a village, because that's what you need. And I can tell you a lot of senior faculty in my position struggle with that. To me, it's one of the joys of the job now, and I know that all three of you feel that way. So I would suggest for the junior investigators as well to find a mentor who has a track record of driving their juniors, of making sure that the juniors achieve. And like Nilo said about Mark, there is no greater joy than finding your junior surpass you in what you have tried to achieve.
Thank you. I think we'll just quickly go on to the very last minute. There's one more slide. Just kind of your reflections, Milind, on your journey as a clinical researcher. What would be your kind of key reflections?
I'm sorry, Juan, can you please repeat that question?
Yeah, just your key reflections on your journey as a clinical researcher.
Yeah, I think the key reflection that I would have is that, in the last 20 years, when we used gemcitabine and 5-FU to where we are now, has been such an amazing journey. And I think, like all of you here, it's a great privilege to be on that journey. I think in the footnote, if you have contributed to that journey, even in a tangible way, even a small tangible way, it's a very satisfactory trajectory for your career. So I would think of nothing else. I've been in private practice before where, the drive is something different, taking care of patients, reimbursement for academia is different. But I think the rewards are far greater. And I'm really happy that all of you tuned in today to really focus on your career as a clinical and a laboratory researcher in cholangiocarcinoma, because I think in the long term, the rewards are overwhelming, far outweigh what you might get elsewhere.
Thank you so much, Milind. And I would echo your thoughts that it does take a village, so we're all part of a team. But just to maybe expand on that, our role in the village also changes as time goes by, and I think we need to be mindful and prepared for that. And finally, I think the most important thing is that we don't lose sight of what we're trying to do. There are patients, there are caregivers who are expecting things from us. They're expecting better care, better treatment, and I think that's our guiding North Star, as it were. So with that, I'm just going to hand back to Kristen and Nilo to close the session.
Well, thank you so much. We really so appreciative. I know you both are so busy. I honestly can't even believe we got you in the same room at the same time. So that was all Tiffany. So thank you so much to Tiffany, who's helps us organize. You all get emails from her. Thank you all for attending. We would love to continue the conversation offline. If you have any additional questions, please get in touch. There is also this is only number 2 of 6 in this webinar series. So we've got a number of webinars coming up. You can find all that information on the cholangiocarcinoma website under the ICRN tab. And we will be sending notifications out to all of those that attended. And if you're on our Young Investigator Committee listserv, you will have that information as well. And Nilo, anything else you would like to add?
No, thank you so much to Milind and to Juan and to all of you for coming, and have a wonderful holiday season and a happy new year.
Absolutely. Thanks so much,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.